Ursula, you had a sudden cardiac arrest in 2012 that changed your life. Can you tell me how that happened? Yes, it was in fact on March 29th, 2012, and not every day is the same, but I had brought my daughter, who was 3.5 years old at the time, to the nursery, and my husband was still asleep at that point in time, and I came back and I thought to myself, I really don't feel very well today. And then I told that to my husband and continued, I think I'm going to lie down for a moment. And so my husband replied, okay, fine. And in the meantime, he would go to our restaurant to prepare a few things for the day. We were self-employed in the restaurant business at the time. He then left the house, and at that moment, my memory just stopped, because thereafter, I apparently fell down. My husband, fortunately, had forgotten an important fax when he had left. And in 2012, it was still common to send a fax, and it's for this reason he came back and saw me lying there. He then tried to resuscitate me by resuscitation measures, and he also organized the rescue helicopter and the emergency doctor, who were there within a very short time. I then needed the defibrillator twice, so to speak, to get the heart going again. But that's just purely for narrative purposes at the moment. The bedroom looked like a battlefield. There were empty vials lying around, which had contained adrenaline. Also, some other things were lying around. And my first conscious memory was the moment when I saw myself lying in the intensive care unit, because the sudden cardiac arrest caused the doctors to put me in an artificial coma. And I was then in a coma for a week. This was then the moment when I saw myself from outside my body, lying in the intensive care unit. Whether I was sitting or standing, I can't say exactly, because you don't know how things are in such a moment. I just saw myself laying there. And this moment will always remain in my memory, because the room was so full of light at that moment. It felt for me as if I was standing in the middle of the sun. Maybe that's the best way to explain it. I can then remember seeing the bed that I was lying in, and there was also a clock there, but the clock hands did not move. It was as if it had stopped. It was just simply, well, shall I say, I was just at such peace, resting in myself. And I can remember so many scenes where my gaze was constantly fixed to the infusion bottles, and I also felt how the infusion liquid ran into my body, as if the blood cells were moving, and I really saw where this liquid was running to. I saw my husband every day, of course, and afterwards I also told him what he had said to me, what conversations he had had with me. I saw my mother with her new glasses. And then I woke up and she came to see me. I said to her, aha, you have new glasses. I knew you had new glasses. And I described everything in detail. And I also told her that she had told me that she had purchased the new glasses. Well, these kind of stories, well, I've said it's somewhat difficult for me to say what happened exactly to me and at what time. What I can remember as well is that there were lots of figures around me, beings of light. I also remember that space no longer had any boundaries, for example. There was no longer a room in an intensive care unit, but everything was boundless, and it was just only bright, with all those usual boundaries being gone. And I found myself in the midst of all this. After your stay in the hospital, you had an enhanced perceptiveness. How did that manifest itself, and how did you learn to deal with it? I was in hospital for a total of 2 weeks, 1 week of which I was in the intensive care unit, and 1 week in the normal ward. They didn't want to discharge me from hospital, but I'm just the kind of person who does that anyway if I think it's right. And I also signed a form for early discharge, but that's beside the point here. So that's how I came back home, where one day I was sitting with my husband on the terrace, and I said to him, listen, do you see this too? my husband asked me, "What do you see?" And I replied, "The man sitting next to me." Then my husband said, "Well, here I am." And I said, "I don't mean you. I mean the one over here." And that's actually how it all began. And I thought to myself, something is weird here. It's sort of like, how shall I put it? Because I actually saw this man and I was able to describe exactly what he looked like. And since I can't categorize esotericism at all, I thought to myself, oh dear, now you belong to the category of clairvoyant, clairsentient, clairaudient people, and I don't know exactly what else it's called. It really touched me that much, but it's not, how shall I say, a kind of must, but it was just simply present. And I then thought, hopefully this will pass, because I wanted to keep my current job. Then I continued to work as a pharmaceutical representative. And one day I was sitting in a waiting room. I still remember that today. There was a man who was about 65 years old, sitting diagonally across from me. And thereupon I thought to myself, what's wrong with his lungs? And as a pharmaceutical representative, of course, you meet the physicians. So you are used to speaking briefly with the doctor in his office. And then I said to the doctor, whom I knew quite well, the man whose turn it is after mine, what's wrong with his lungs? He then asked me, how do you know that? And I answered him, I can see it. But the situation was really embarrassing for me. It was just spooky. And I had the feeling that I really didn't want that, but it was just simply so present at this moment. But all returned to normal again, thank God, because at that point in time, it would have been impossible for me to simply accept this. The night my son passed away, I heard a scream, and I thought that this was my daughter's scream, but it was the scream of my son who had passed away that night. So after I made a decision for myself, due to this second event, now that's enough. I then resigned from my job and said to my husband, now I'm a housewife and mother, and I intend to stay at home. Whereupon these spiritual phenomena became even more prevalent. If you discontinue an activity, there is now room for another to grow. And from that point onward, these abilities were there not just for 5 minutes at a time, but for 24 hours. Well, on the question as to how I deal with it, I can say that it was very difficult at first, because I thought to myself, maybe it isn't what I really want. Nobody ever asked me if I really wanted to do this, but in any case, it was somehow clear to me that I had to try to do my best. That is, based on a contract between, up there, my companions and me. It had been agreed upon that I would do this thing, whatever it will be like, but that I would not look into the future. I requested they not send me people who wanted to know what the future held for them. And that way it all grew in a manner that I can see spiritual things for 24 hours a day, and that there are 3 different voices talking to me, whispering to me. Well, I constantly feel like I know too much. I don't know why, it's just the way it is. But I've also learned, when I'm out privately, not to listen. And then this spiritual encounter feels like it's going on behind a kind of curtain. And even though I'm aware of it, I then just pass over it somehow. You were speaking of a companion. Can you explain that in more detail? Well, I know my companions. They change every now and then. Quite often I see my deceased father and my son. My main companion, so to speak, is Sanat Kumara, who introduced himself to me once in the initial phase. At that time, I didn't know that someone like him even existed. And he speaks to me, and the other 2 voices used to change, so I can't really assign them properly. It is a female and a male voice, but it's Sanat's voice that I hear the most. This spirit being then is supporting you in your work? Exactly, but sometimes there's a muddle when all the voices are speaking at the same time, as is the case often. But I have gotten used to it. I have also a bit of, how shall I put it, I am a bit of a crazy woman in a way that I know such muddles, or shall I put it this way, I'm also rather humorous, and that's why I used to take things as they come. And that wasn't difficult for me at any time. but it's in any case a gift. And it all is a truly enriching experience for me. So the spiritual capacity for perception is not a burden for you? No, by no means, not at all. Quite to the contrary. I experience diversity through it, and this means, as I said before, being at rest in myself, thereby being conveyed, how shall I put it, a kind of trust in a greatness, but not in the sense of how great am I, but in a sense of resting in myself. And these voices are conveying all these messages to me in order to preserve them, so to speak, but also to pass them on. Maybe one can explain it that way. What impact did these experiences have on your life and your worldview? Well, actually, my husband and I were not yet married at the time, so the first impact might have been that I said to him, "Listen, if you want to marry me, you may, you shall, you can go this way with me. Otherwise, it would perhaps be better not to get married, because the situation would also be cheaper for us." But he said to me that he would like to take this path together with me, and that, of course, also means that I can no longer return to my original life, because I cannot switch off these channels of perception. I cannot say, today I still perceive it, but from tomorrow I no longer want anything to do with it, or I no longer hear anything or know anything about this. That's not possible. It has enriched my life a lot, and also my family's life. We have a daughter who is now 14, so she's going through puberty. But of course, she has learned that also because she has noticed that there are more people present at home, because we are always accompanied. Everyone is being accompanied constantly by their guardian angel, and also by another companion. And this one changes from time to time. And how can I say this insight has changed my worldview in a way that I have understood that we are just simply never alone, but protected throughout our life, guided, touched. Yet we have our own free will to be able to say no. And in the light of this, I say quite often no to my husband's chagrin. Well, I'm just saying that it's not a burden at all. And I also tell my clients who come to me that if they can't accept it, that's okay. It's each person's decision. And I too could have said, no, I won't do it. This would not have been a bad thing. But for me, it was somehow, well, I'll try to explain it in a different way. I write a lot in my diaries, and this since I was about 8 years old, writing down a lot of my thoughts every day. And I have always felt this kind of temple with 4 pillars, where one pillar was constantly missing. So my temple used to be slightly crooked, and now I know what this pillar is. And this insight makes me whole. That is how I feel about it. But it can be a burden for someone else, and they then have to ignore this very pillar. But for me, it was very clear. I was missing this pillar, and only now do I feel. What kind of work are you doing now as a result of these experiences you have had? I have been self-employed as a spiritual mentor since 2016. What has helped me a lot, or what still helps me a lot, is that I was a pharmaceutical sales representative for over 20 years. So I do have a little bit of medical knowledge. And how can I say there are people coming to me from the age of, well, my youngest customer or client came to me 3 weeks ago, and it was a baby, and the oldest is 65. I then gave them advice, guidance for their life, so to speak. That is, people come to me in all life situations, be it because of an illness or due to professional decisions, or because they have marital difficulties, whatever it is, because they simply, well, they know all about it already. One knows what it is all about. They just need an outsider to give them an impetus. And this is then the impetus for a domino that falls. In this work, you are being supported on the part of spiritual beings. Yes, thank God. They are always very active. And may I tell you a little story or give you a hint? My first client was a young man. He was actually only 7 years old, and he had really swollen red lips. He used to go to school with his hand in front of his lips because he was so ashamed about it. And he was then with me, although he obviously said before, "No, I'm not going to a witch. I won't go there. No, I don't do that." Then, when finally he was with me, I looked at him and said, "Dandelion tincture." Since he was one of my first clients, I was surprised at what I had just said, and his mother repeated smilingly, "Dandelion tincture," whereupon I said, "It helps." And it all happens that way, that I'm always so surprised of what comes out because I can't know what I'm saying, because I have no idea about plants or about stones or about anything like that. It's just simply my companions that feed me with these inspirations that are then simply present in me, and I then pass them on. Of course, I often Google for the truth about some of the inspirations I was given concerning my first client, because of course I was still lacking in trust at the time. But now I no longer have to search in Google, because I know for sure that what I say is just simply true, and that's it. And in view of the fact that it all proves true, the successes then feel so good, even though these successes are not mine, because I only give the relevant impulse. Presently, for example, I have a client who is no longer suffering from neurodermatitis and has now given birth to twins. There's another woman who never was able to eat normal food, no bread, no vegetables, no fruit, nothing, and now she can eat everything. There are also people who are suddenly smiling early in the morning, things like that. But that's not me. It's just the guidance, so to speak, coming to me from above, or from the side, or from wherever, then flowing through me, and I then pass it on. Ursula, thank you very much for the interview. Many thanks to you.